is one which, if you've either been through Gerus or working at it at the moment, there may be certain little points which at times sound a little bit uncomfortable. Please don't be offended. We will come round ultimately to an end point at which, as if you look right through on page 5, to the last source from the Sefer Chinuch, the mitzvah to love the proselyte. So ultimately, we are positive about those who want to become part of Am Yisrael, but we do have certain areas, I wouldn't quite say necessarily of reservation, but certainly it's true to say that Judaism is, unlike all of the other major world faiths, is not a proselytizing religion. And that will become clear as we proceed through the sources together this morning. So let's start with source number 1, a Gemara in the Maseches Yevamos, Daf Mem Zayin Amud Beis, very well-known source, Omamar Ger Shebo Liskaya, someone who comes to convert, a potential proselyte. Omrimle, the first response is, Ma ra'isa shebo liskaya. Why on earth do you want to convert? What are you coming to convert for? We inform that person about a few of the lighter and a few of the more serious mitzvahs. My time, what's the reason? Di parish, nifrish. If the potential proselyte decides to relent, decides they don't want to go ahead with the process, fine, let them relent. We are not looking for increased numbers. Some might say we've got enough problems dealing with our own. We don't need to add, sort of as when Moshe Rabbeinu was going down to Mitzrayim, famously, Aaron sees him coming with his wife and children. He says to him, we've got enough problems with those who are in Egypt. Don't bring more on board. Same thing, we've got enough problems sorting out those of our people who are not as yet perhaps as fully engaged with the religion as they should be. So therefore, we're not a religion which looks to increase our numbers through proselytizing. This is clear from this source in the Gemara. Dom Rab Chelbo says, Rab Chelbo said, Koshim gerim Yisrael kasapachas. Proselytes can be difficult for the Jewish people, like a boil, like a scab. Sorry, again, no offense intended, and we'll balance this out during the course of this year, but there is this approach which says, and we'll see why in Tosos in a moment, source number 2, why proselytes can be regarded as a liability, something we don't look for in the first instance. Dirsiv, as the verse in Yeshaya says, "V'nilva hager aleihem v'nisbechu beis Yaakov." The proselyte will join them, will be added to the house of Jacob, not seen necessarily in a positive sense. So Tosfos explains, what's this idea that proselytes are as difficult to the Jewish people as sapachas? And here we'll see something beautiful about the way in which righteous proselytes actually add to the sum total of Am Yisrael. The first reason is that we're not necessarily so much looking for additional converts. Lefi she'ein bikin b'dikduke mitzvahs. As we'll see in the process of this shir, a proselyte is inevitably not fully well versed in all the details of mitzvahs. V'Yisrael lemeidim mima'aseim. And the Jewish people may come to learn from the way that they practice the religion, and as a result of that, our total commitment and engagement with Torah mitzvahs may be diluted, may be weakened. Then Tosfos goes on to say, there's another reason that Rashi explains why we're not perhaps so favorably disposed. And by the way, this is part of the dichotomy of conversion. We'll see later on the positive side, but at the moment, developing on the basis of this Gemara in Yevamos Mem Zayin, another reason why we may not be so positively disposed is Mishum Kol Yisrael. We know there is a contract, as we might call it, of mutual responsibility within the ranks of the Jewish people. And as a result of that, we're sort of worried we don't need to add another link in that very large chain of mutual responsibility. The kosher says Tosfos, this explanation of Rashi from Maseches Neder Daf Yud Gimel is difficult because Beperek Elu Nemorim in Soto we find mashma shelo hoyu arevin ala gerim, that proselytes were not included in this bond of mutual responsibility. Deloi choshiv hosam arva shel erev rav, because in that Gemara in Soto we see that the erev rav, the mixed multitude who came up from Egypt with the Jewish people, were not included in that grouping of arvus, of mutual responsibility. So therefore Tosfos rejects Rashi's explanation from that Gemara Maseches Nida, and we're left, if you like, with the first reason of Tosfos, and that is that there is a certain weakness in the way perhaps in which proselytes may practice the religion. But then Tosfos goes on to say a third reason, a third possible reason. A third reason is that proselytes may be problematic, is that in the intermingling and the actual provenance of families in Israel is something which we prefer to be long established, and the divine presence rests on mishpochsim yuchosos, families of well-established provenance, and therefore that, if you like, is considered to be something which may be problematic where the divine presence is concerned. V'yesh mefoshim, now a fourth answer, lefi shebeyoser huzu Yisrael alagerim ve'ein yechem mizeh me'onosim. There's another reason. We'll see later on that there are 36 or 46 different places in the Torah where we, Am Yisrael, are warned to be careful against hurting the feelings of a proselyte. Va'ahavtem esager, loving the proselyte once he or she has got through the obstacles and the barriers of conversion, is a very significant tenet of the Torah. And therefore, says Tosfos, perhaps one of the reasons why we say that Gerim Akoshim Yisrael, we find that proselytes may be a difficulty for us, is because we've got to be so careful not to hurt their feelings. So again, I stress, anyone on the call who may be seeing these negative indicators at this particular point, please don't be offended by it. We're going to see it in the rounds. And when I thought of this title, the complementary dichotomy of conversion al pi halacha, that's exactly the point. We come at it from two angles, and we'll see one angle which is very positive towards proselytes once they, as it were, taken the first steps into conversion, into Gior, but not being a proselytizing religion. So we've seen here in Tosfos 4 different reasons, one which Tosfos himself rejects from Rashi, certainly 3 reasons which stand, according to Tosfos, as to why proselytizing is not something that we would look positively upon Gerus. And source number 3 on page 1 from a Tosfos Yeshonim, from an older version of the Tosfos, beautiful 4th or 5th pshat as to why Koshin Gerim Yisrael Kusapachas, why we view Gerim proselytes as being, in a way you might call it, problematic. And that is, Oid Yesh Mefoshim, says the Tosfos Yeshonim, Fisha Kodesh Baruch Hu Mani Sheisonu Al Yodom. We, those who are born Jewish, suffer by comparison to the Mesiras Nefesh, to the self-sacrifice, the nobility, the choices which proselytes have consciously made. HaKadosh Baruch Hu Mani Sheisonu, we get punished al Yodom, through the Gerim. Kishemetivim Ma'aseim, when proselytes behave well, when they grow in their learning, in their mitzvahs and their masim tovim, they adhere to the religion. V'omer ki hu ro'eh she'ein onu nizorim b'mitzvahs k'meisom. There's a famous pshat which explains why Yonah didn't want to go and give his prophecy to the city of Nineveh, because he knew Shekrove Teshuahin, they would be close to being saved, they would repent easily, and as a result of that, we, Am Yisrael, would look bad by comparison to the people of Nineveh. So here, the Gerim, good righteous proselytes, hold our feet to the fire, as it were. Even they may not have as good a lineage as we may have, they actually set an example to us, set a standard to us. Kol hakavod lahem. That's a fourth or fifth reason as to why we might be concerned about Gerim joining our ranks, because we won't look so good when compared to them. And a fifth reason, which we find in the Ibn Ezra in source number 4, Dvarim Perik Lamed Aleph Posuk Yud Beis, the mitzvah of Hakel, Hakel es anoshim anoshim vataf v'gerecho asher b'sharecha. You should gather together the people, the men, the women, the children, the stranger in your gates, in order they will hear, in order they will learn. V'yoru es Hashem elekechem, they will fear the Lord your God. V'shomru la'asos es kol divrei haTorah hazos, and they will observe, they will keep all of these words of the Torah. Says the Ibn Ezra, Gerecha, this ger is not someone who's gone through a complete process of gerus. The Torah actually talks about a number of possibilities of individuals who can become connected to Am Yisrael, associates, members, we might call it, of Am Yisrael, but are not full converts. So, for example, a Shifcha Kananis, or an Eved Kanani, someone who is a servant, goes into service within a Jewish family, but is not themselves Jewish, becomes obligated to a certain level of mitzvah observance. A Ger Toshov, a righteous sojourner, someone who lived in Eretz Yisrael, in the land of Israel, in the time when the Jewish people were Yoshim al Admosam, when we first came to the land of Israel, a Ger Toshav was a proselyte who sojourned in the land of Israel, and therefore the Ibn Ezra understands this pasuk, the Ger is not referring to the Ger Tzedek, someone's been through the complete process of Gerus, of conversion, but Gerecha Ulai Yisyahed, someone who is a Ger Toshav is a partial Ger, an associate. If he or she comes to Hakel, maybe they will be convinced to complete the journey. Maybe they will become fully fledged members of Am Yisrael. So in source number 5, we see there, source number 4, this is a fifth reason, if you like, of Koshin Ger Yisrael. This is moving away a little bit from that sense of it being something negative into something which is more positive. We see an attitude of the Torah, which, of course, certainly according to the Ibn Ezra's Peshat, that a person may well be encouraged to fully join up with Am Yisrael through the experience of Hakel. Now, in source number 5, the Gemara in Psochim Peizayin Amud Beis, we see another angle to this. This is again the more positive angle of Gerus, which, as I say, stands in as a part of a complementary dichotomy. It's very much in contradistinction to the first three sources that we looked at together just before. And this is Gemara in Psochim say Peizayin, which stands very much at the opposite end of the pole to the Gemara in Yevamos, which said Koshin Gerim are difficult for Am Yisrael to absorb. Here we see exactly the opposite. Omer Rabbi Loza, source number 5, says Rabbi Loza, Lo hikla HaKadosh Baruch Hu es Yisrael. HaKadosh Baruch Hu did not cause the Jewish people to be exiled, Leveinu Umos, amongst the nations, Elo Kadei Sheyitoisvu Aleim Gerim. The whole purpose of us being exiled, says this Gemara, is that we should be able to have righteous proselytes added to our number, added to our ranks. Shneimar, as the Pasuk in Hosea chapter 2, verse 25 says, V'zarisiha li ba'oretz, he says, I will sow her for myself in the land, says the Gemara, Klum odom zereh so ela lahachnis kamakurin. Why does a person sow seeds? Only in order to be able to gather a large amount, a large harvest subsequently. So the verse says, I've scattered them. Am Yisrael have been scattered like seeds across the face of the earth. That that smaller measure of seed that's been scattered is so that we should come back, we should return with several kurin, a large amount. And therefore this Gemara stresses the positive aspect of Gerus, although it still doesn't mean that we are actually a nation which is a proselytizing nation. A very, very rare, if ever has it been, perhaps the only time was at the time of the Kusim in early biblical times in Eretz Yisrael, when there was a time with Chizkiah Melech into sort of almost, as it were, encouraging, positively encouraging, seeking out Gerim. But in general, whilst we'll see there is an Ahavas Hager, as I said at the outset, a love of the righteous proselyte once he or she has completed the process, we're not necessarily so encouraging at the beginning. And as we know, we certainly are not encouraging of intimate relationships between Jews and non-Jews, and that will become clear in the next two sources for the next two sources, which indicate the extent to which righteous people who did appear to consort with non-Jews of the opposite gender doesn't necessarily mean they did so in a way which was inappropriate to their status as people of stature within the ranks of Am Yisrael, and Gerus played a significant part in these relationships. So in source number 6, the Rambam in Hilchos Yisrei Bia, and you'll see the next two sources are particularly beautifully punctuated. They've even got the Hebrew vowels. My thanks to Rabbi Fine for the way in which he prepared these particular sources in the course of the quite significant source material that he prepared for this Matmid program. So al yale al datcho sheshimshon HaMashiach Yisrael Shlem Melech Yisrael Shnikri Yedid Hashem Nosu Noshim Nochrius Begeyusun. Do not imagine that Shimshon HaGibor, the mighty Samson who saved Klal Yisrael in his dalliance with Delilah, or Shlem HaMelech Yisrael, or Shlem King Solomon of Israel, Shnikri Yedid Hashem, who is called in Nach actually the precious one of the Lord, Nosu Noshim Nochrios Begeyuson. Do not imagine that they actually came to marry non-Jewish women when they were actually not yet converted. But this is how to understand this matter. The correct approach and the right way to deal with Gerus is that when a person comes to be a potential convert, maybe there is an ulterior motive. Maybe there is something else which is pushing this person towards their desire for Gerus. Maybe it's because they think they'll stand to gain financially, financial gain. Or maybe they think they'll get a certain elevated status, a position of authority. Or maybe they're afraid. They see that the Jewish people have a level of morality, of goodness, of refinement, of moral authority, and then they're afraid that if they don't throw in their lot with Am Yisrael, they'll suffer negative fallout. If it's a man, we're concerned that maybe the reason he wants to convert is because there's a Jewish woman he wants to marry and he's doing the Shem Ishus. Gerus l'Shem Ishus, conversion for the sake of marriage alone, is not something which is viewed favorably. Likewise, any other ulterior motive which the Rambam has identified here. Likewise, if it's a woman, we're concerned also that the woman may be wanting to convert because there's a young Jewish man she wants to marry. Very interesting point the Rambam says here. If you find there is no ulterior motive, we inform them of the serious nature of the Torah and the huge amount of effort which is required in order to keep to the Torah. We explain to the nations that you know what, this is something which is not so easy to do, and be aware that this is a weighty burden. I've had an occasion. Since we've had a nice simcha, there's been a nice wedding on the Sunday afternoon. Monday morning, I get a phone call in my office. Hello, Rabbi Ginsbury. I was at Sandra's wedding yesterday afternoon. I said, oh, yes. She said, oh, it's beautiful. That chuppah was marvelous. I said, yes, what's your name? I said, my name's Sandra O'Reilly. I said, oh, yes, okay, very nice to speak to you. Can I help you at all? Yeah, I was thinking I'd like to be Jewish. I'd like a wedding on that. I'd like to be Jewish. I said, oh, really? Okay, yeah. I said, are you aware that to be Jewish, you can't go out to discos on Friday night? No, you serious? Really? I said, yeah, that's the part of the deal. I said, are you aware that you can't just stop off on the motorway and have a cheeseburger to Happy Eater? You're joking, Rabbi. Are you serious? That's what's involved. I said, yeah. Oh, she said, I got to think about this again. I said, that's fine. Call me back if you're interested. That's fine. But otherwise, have a nice day. Right. So that's sort of in Yesh Ba'ila. If a person has got some sort of very superficial desire and it's quickly the enthusiasm wanes when they realize just a little bit of what the commitment to Torah mitzvahs is about, then fine. In Kiblu Pirshu, sorry, so Kadeshi Froshu. We do this deliberately because we're not keen to encourage proselytization in the first instance. But in Kiblu Veloy Pirshu, if however a person shows themselves to that, yeah, that's fine. I want to take all of this on and more, and they don't back off. And you can see that the motivation is one of genuine love for Hashem, for His Torah, for His people, to have a part of that heritage. We accept them, as the verse says in Rus, and I'm sure most of, if not all of you on this call are aware that one of the paradigms for conversion is the conversion of Rus in Megillas Rus, which carries her name. Rus, the daughter-in-law of Naomi, Hashova Mistei Moav, who came back with her from the fields of Moav. And this we say in Rus, chapter 1, verse 18. Naomi saw how much Rus was exerting herself to go with it, to go back with her, and so she ceased speaking with her. She ceased seeking to discourage her. Continuing now on page, on source number 7, bottom of page 2. This is the reason why the Beis Din did actually, they put a moratorium on Gerus during the days of King David and King Solomon. Why? The Jewish people was at such a zenith, such a peak of its powers, that anybody who would want to convert and become have a piece of this. The economy was good, the security was good, the land was good, everything was flourishing and going so well, and therefore one just simply could not assume that any ger, any potential proselyte, was joining for the right reasons. Maybe in the days of David was such a powerful king and so successful in battle, they were scared. In the days of King Solomon, maybe because of the sovereignty, the goodness, the greatness, the opulence, the magnificence of the palace that Shlomo built, of the Beis Hamikdash that Shlomo built. For anyone who chooses to turn away from the pathway of being a Gentile to the pathway of Judaism cannot be a righteous proselyte. You've got to want to be a proselyte for the sake of all of the fundamental good reasons of wanting to be a Jew, not because of the extraneous superficialities of a nice wedding that you attended or whatever it may be. Fascinating thing. Here the Rambam tells us, already in the days of David and Shlomo, with how well sorted everything was, you cannot squeeze the underground market forces out of the system. What happened? There were still game in the days of David and Shlomo. They didn't do it officially. They did it underground, undercover, what today we might call the equivalent of garden minyonim, garden bote din, or garden gerusin, garden proselytizations. לא ידויכינוס nach שתורם מכל מקום, ולא מקורבינוס עד שתרא אחריסם. Fascinating. What was the approach of the authorities of the Beis Nagodl to this unofficial gerus that took place? Beis Nagodl was somewhat suspicious of this, was somewhat uncomfortable with it. And as a result of that, their policy was they didn't reject them outright. They didn't say that these are not gerim at all. Once they'd gone through the process of gerus, kabbalas mitzvahs, accepting the mitzvahs, milah for a man, tevilah for a woman, the korbanos, the offerings that are brought, etc. And what did they do? They took a sort of Parov approach. They didn't push them aside, and they didn't do anything to encourage them until it became clear, until it was clear what the outcome would be. If they saw they were indeed righteous proselytes, then fine. So very, very interesting sources there in the Rambam about what actually the Gerus process is all about and what happened in the days of David and Shlomo, both politically with a small p, with those who did unofficially convert, and with the fact that in general they didn't want to have gerus at that time because of the likelihood that gerus proselytization was going to be motivated and driven by anything other than the purest of motives. Source number 8, coming back to the Gemara in Yevamos Daf Mem Zayin, a little bit earlier now, Omid Aleph on base. In the introduction, source number 1, we brought down this source about saying that we discourage a ger. Now we're going to look at this in greater detail, the first part of the Gemara. Tonu Rabbon, the rabbis taught, page 3, source 8. Ger shebali sky bisman nazeh. A proselyte who comes to convert nowadays, we say to him or her the following: what on earth are you doing? Why on earth would you want to convert? Are you not aware that Jewish people today are shunned, pushed aside, demonized, rubbished, and consumed by afflictions? It's not such a wonderful thing being part of Am Yisrael. That's the way that one can present a certain narrative. Chas v'sholem, God forbid that should be the way we really feel about our Yiddishkeit. It's much too precious and delightful a thing for us to actually say this is the only angle, but there is an angle whereby it can be presented this way. If the potential proselyte says, Yodea ani, I'm well aware of all of these factors that you've made clear here, ve'eni kedai, and indeed I'm not worthy of joining Am Yisrael. I understand, in all humility, I'm not fully deserving. Am I able to put up with all of these challenges? I don't know. I want to do my best. I know I'm not worthy, but I'd like to try. Then then a person who has that attitude and says, as the Medrash says, Avram Avinu said when he went to Akedah and the Yetzer Hara appeared many times trying to distract him, once like a raging torrent of a river, various other examples, and Avram Avinu said, Alma Naskein, whatever you tell me, the Almighty's told me to go to the Akedah, I'm going to the Akedah, I'm proceeding. A non-Jew who comes and that's his or her attitude to conversion, Kol hakavod. What do we do next then? We inform that person, we relate to them some of the lighter elements of mitzvah observance, some of the more serious mitzvahs. We make known to that person also the sin inherent if not leaving the gleanings of your field, though the sheaves which have been forgotten, the corners of the field, and the importance of giving tithes to the poor. That's one of the areas that we make known, which is both very uplifting, morally ennobling, but also is a financial responsibility. We also make known to the potential proselyte the punishment which there is for transgressing mitzvahs. You'll see later on that another fascinating element in having a circumspect attitude to accepting gerim is that once you become a ger, there's no way back. Once you're a ger tzedek, you're as much part of Am Yisrael as anyone who's been there since Har Sinai, since Kabbalah Torah. There's no difference. And therefore, we have a great concern. We don't want to create Gerim who in 3, 4, 5 months, years, decades time is going to slip back. We want Gerim who are going to be a zechus, who are going to be a merit to themselves, to Am Yisrael, to Hashem Yisparach. And therefore we make known, I mean, it's impossible. How can you teach in a matter of months, even years, somebody to have a full understanding of what it means to be part of Am Yisrael? Today, the Bate Din generally like to ensure that there's at least one complete cycle of a Jewish year which a potential ger or family of gerim, potential gerim, will live through, so they'll understand what a cycle of the Jewish calendar is like. You know, yeah, I can put up with Pesach and the Seder, get rid of chametz, but I've got to fast Holy Yom Kippur. Oh, I'm not sure I can get through with that. You need to make sure they're exposed to as much of a feel of what genuine observance of Torah mitzvahs is all about. And so there is this sort of balance: the lighter mitzvahs, the more serious mitzvahs, the sin of not keeping to tzedakah and to chesed and to caring for the poor. Modinos and onshin mitzvahs, we make known also the punishment if one is a recidivist, if one doesn't keep to the mitzvahs. Omna, we say, you should know that until you decided to throw in your lot with Am Yisrael, you went to the happy eater to have your cheeseburger, no problem. There's no punishment of excommunication for that. You decided to go to the football Shabbos afternoon, nothing wrong with that. There's no punishment by stoning. But now, if you eat forbidden fats, got to be very careful which part of the meat you can eat, which part of the meat you can't eat. Of course, the kosher meat we get in the butcher today is all non-chelev meat. But if you were to go out and arrange for the shechita of your own animal, the hindquarters, which is particularly filled with chelev, and that's why nikur, purging the hindquarters, is so difficult, which is why Dan Abramsky, nearly now a century ago, established the practice that in this country we don't make use of the hindquarters because of the difficulty in purging them. So, ochalta chelev onush koris, chilalta Shabbos, onush skila, you get stoned. You should know we balance it out in the same way that we make known the punishment for breaking the mitzvahs. We also make known the reward. You should know that Olam Haba, to get the good place in the hereafter, in the transcendent, everlasting life of the hereafter, you've got to be righteous. Yisrael, for the Jewish people at this time, you should know that Am Yisrael today are not in the greatest of situations whereby it's difficult for us to reach the highest level of reward and goodness, and equally Hashem understands we're a weak generation and we can't withstand the challenges of huge amounts of suffering and difficulty. And then I just continue a little bit further with the Gemara. I hit this point. Ein marabin alav. We don't make it too difficult. We don't overburden that potential gyeres, proselyte. Ein medaktin alav. We don't sort of try to catch him or her out. We're not too particular. And if they accept it, kibel malino simiyad. If the person indeed shows a genuine concern and interest and desire to embrace the ways of Judaism, we accept him or her straight away. If it's a man, we proceed to bris milah, etc. The next bit, which I've sort of put in lighter print, I'm not going to go through at the moment, that is the Gemara goes through the different levels of appropriate process for either a male or female convert, as far as for the male with bris milah, and then that's how one actually conducts the immersion process for a man, for a woman in a mikveh kashira, etc. And what are the terms and conditions for gerus? That's probably another share that we don't have time to go into at the moment. As I say, we're primarily focusing on this, as I call it, complementary dichotomy, the pushing away and the drawing close. So let's have a look now at source number 9, bottom of page 3, going on to page 4, which explains to us something more about from this Gemara to appear, you turn up to the Beis Din and you sort of spend a few minutes there, whatever, etc., and you convince them, and they have a conversation with half an hour, telling you the serious things, less serious things, and okay, you want to have a bris? The mole's in the next room. We all know it doesn't go like that. Takes time for a number of reasons. May take a good year or two or even longer. A person's got to become fluent in reading Hebrew. A person's got to become fluent in their knowledge of mitzvahs, go through at least one cycle of the year, etc. And beyond that, very interesting, again, it's beyond the scope of the shir today. The question is, if a person is converting, and we know that is the case sometimes, is converting for the purposes of marriage, then how do we square that circle? We said before in the Rambam, and the Gemara itself made it clear, that you're not allowed to convert for an ulterior motive. So there's a famous teshuvas which have been written about this by various dayanim. Dayan Grosnas wrote a teshuva about this, others, that the arichus man, the fact that one takes a considerable amount of time, and the fact that there are ebbs and flows and obstacles to be overcome, that compensates, if you like, for the ulterior motive. So it's a bit of a trade-off between one and the other. But in general, the principle is, once a person has convinced us that they genuinely want to convert, ein marbin alav ve'ein medakskim alav, the Gemara said, we don't excessively take time to overburden that individual, and we're not too particular with them. Rabbi also says, my kra, what's the posuk? And this is fascinating, Dirsiv. This is a microcosm of the whole process of Gerus. And this is the conversation that takes way as they're going along the road between Naomi and Rus. It says that Naomi saw how committed Rus was, how determined she was to become Jewish, to throw in a lot with Am Yisrael, and then she ceased trying to dissuade her. Omrallah, what did Naomi say to Rus? Look at this, 5 or 6 examples. Also, Lonu Tchum Shabbos. She said, I don't know if you realize it, she says, but on Shabbos, we're a bit constrained. We can't go more than 2,000 amas from where we started off at the beginning of Shabbos. So what was Rus's response? Ba'asher telchi elech. Where you go, I'll go. I'm not bothered by that, not shaken by it at all. Osilonu yichud. We're not allowed to be alone, to seclude ourselves with someone of the opposite gender to whom we're not either closely related or married. There's a wonderful story which Rabbi Beryl Wine told once from the pulpit in Riley Close a number of years ago, where he called his sermon defensive driving, something which I know we've got a few on the call this morning from Israel. It's all about the other Mashigana and what he or she may be about to do. So Rabbi Wine gave an example of yichud, of the way in which the Torah teaches us defensive modality. So he told the story shortly after he made Aliyah, and he and his wife had moved to Israel, and they had an ozeret, they had a help that came in a couple of times a week. And once it happened that his wife was there, Rabbi Wine's wife was out of the house, the ozeret was in the house, and Rabbi Wine was there alone with the ozeret, so he left the front door open. So then started a sort of game of open door, close the door, because the ozeret sees the doors open, thinks that's funny, she closes the door. Rabbi Wine gets up and he opens the door. She goes and closes the door. He goes and opens the door. And this continued a few times. And then she comes, she says, Kvod Harav, she says, can I ask what's going on here with the front door? So he explains a little bit about Yichud. He says, nothing about you, nothing about me, but this is the halacha. The Torah tells us that we have to leave the door open if there's a man and woman who are not permitted to be alone together. Well, one of the ways of avoiding the prohibition is to keep the door open. So Rabbi Wine says, the Ozeret looked at him and she said to him, Aval ata kol kach zaken. She said, but you're so old. She says, surely it's not a problem. Rabbi Wine, with his dry American wit, turned around and said, I didn't want to show her otherwise. And therefore he left the door open. That was it. Osilon yichud. This is the prohibition of yichud. And what did she say? The same conditions under which you'll lie down, I'll lie down. If we've got to be careful about yichud and avoid beating in a certain place alone, I'll keep to that. And then she said, mafkadinon sheish miros v'yud gimel mitzvahs. Mafkadinon, we're instructed with 630 mitzvahs. Amech ami. Your people are my people. I can withstand that. We're not allowed to worship idols. Your God's my God. Arba Mises Nimsula Bastin says, Nomi Turus, you should know there are 4 categories of death by the earthly bestin which can be administered for different areas. You break Shabbos, there can be skila, there can be stoning. As you die, I'll die. Beis Kavoim Nimsula Bastin said, Nomi, you should know there are 2 special graveyards for 2 different types of executions carried out by a Bastin. This is quite a difficult religion, and you break certain conditions deliberately, it's going to be very harsh. Shomer Kova. Don't worry, if that's how it ends up, I'll be buried there. Miyad, immediately says the Gemara, Nomi saw how committed Rus was, and she no longer tried to dissuade her. Now, in source number 10, we come to a very interesting point about the whole concept of why there is this dichotomy in Gerus. Why is it that in the sources we've seen so far, there are some which are very positive and consider that part of our whole reason for exile is that we should have extra proselytes. And on the other hand, there are some sources which seem to show that no, Koshin Gerus, that we find Gerim to be something which are a challenge to us. So there is a fascinating Gemara in Ksuvas Daf Yud Aleph Amud Aleph, page 4, source number 10. Omer Rav Huna said, Rav Huna ger cotton matbil no soal das bastin. A ger cotton, if you have a pre-bat mitzvah convert, what can you do with him or her? Do they have to wait till after the age of bar bat mitzvah in order to say they become gerim of their own volition? When they have their own das, they have their own intent, they can make up their own mind, they're of age of majority? Or can we even be matbil them? Can we immerse them in a mikveh, even a young baby who doesn't know anything about what's happening? So there's a principle, matbil noisei al das bastin. We can be matbil them with the bastin acting as their agent in this act. Maiko mashvalon. So what does this come to teach us, says the Gemara? There is a fascinating principle, which I'll illustrate to you in a moment by means of bank deposits and bank withdrawals. But the principle is, I can do something on your behalf which is to your advantage, but not something which is to your disadvantage. So, for example, I can ask you for your bank details, or perhaps you'll ask me for my bank details, and I can make a deposit on your behalf into your bank. You can do so for me as well. You can make a bank transfer to me. I can make one to you. And once I've got your bank details, you might even not know about it. And you said, oh, goodness me, where did that money come from? And hopefully it's come from legal and proper sources, morally acceptable sources, and you'll make use of it. That's fine. That's a chusulay. If I tried to use the same bank details to withdraw money from your account, that the bank won't allow me to do, that you wouldn't allow me to do, and that is considered to be that you can't do something which is a debit for someone without their knowledge. Now, the principle of this is based on, we generally understand that zochin la'odam, doing something which is to a person's benefit, advantage, without their knowledge, adding to their sum total of possessions, whatever it may be, that works mitam shlichus. That works on the basis of agency. And there is a principle, zochin la'odam shloi b'fanov, you can do this without a person's knowledge. Ve'ein chovin la'odam shloi b'fanov, but you can't create a debit, a deficit, a disbenefit to a person without their knowledge. So the question is twofold here now. How do we achieve the shlichus when the child who is a minor can't actually have a das, can't have can't make a statement, is not considered to have the ability to make up their own mind to choose gerus? How can we do that? So the base in act is the shlichim. And Zechusulai, we have to consider that becoming a Ger Tzedek, converting to Judaism, is considered to be a benefit. So the Gemara asks now, what are you telling me in this Gemara about Ger Cotton that you can be al das based in? You're telling me it's a zechus that I can do something for someone without their knowledge, without their involvement, because it's a zechus. Tanina, we've learned that previously. You can do something which is to a person's benefit without their knowledge, but not something to their disbenefit. Mao de Tema says the Gemara now a very interesting principle, which we work out the fundamental concept of Gerus. A non-Jew may prefer the freedom to go to football on Shabbos afternoon and a disco on Friday night. And therefore, who am I to impose the zechus of becoming a member of Klal Yisrael? Because we know, for example, in the Eved Vazai Befkir Nichale, the Gemara establishes elsewhere that an Eved, a servant. Why don't we take all our servants, lock, stock, and barrel, the Shifcha Kananis and the Eved Kanani, and use Zochin to make them all into fully fledged Jews? Because they actually enjoy their half-half status. They actually enjoy not being fully fledged Jews. They only want to be associates. They don't want to be fully fledged members. We say that this applies only to a person who has achieved majority, only to a person who is at a level of maturity and decision making. Then it might be a zechus, and you can't, for example, do a gerus to a godel, to someone who is a bardas, someone who's got their own decision making powers. You can't override that, but on the basis of saying, oh, you know what? This particular person, I'll do gerus from his behalf because of chusalo, not with a godel, but with a cotton. And the reason that's the time Yisura. A godel, someone who's older, knows what it is to be able to live a life where you're not bound hand and foot by 630 mitzvahs. Avol cotton, but for a young child, zechusula, it's a zechus. This teaches us something very interesting as well. Essentially, to become a ger tzedek, to become a proselyte, to become part of Am Yisrael, is a zechus, is a merit. As I said, we're not a proselytizing religion. We don't force it on people, but we certainly understand that ultimately, and we once had a conversation around our Shabbos table, initiated one of our kids on the occasion, very interesting conversation. If you had the choice, born Jewish and born to a rabbinic household, to renounce your Judaism, would you do it or not? And everyone, Baruch Hashem, came down the right side of the equation. Everyone viewed it as a chus. No one would want to even try it, but they all had different reasonings and rationales as to why they wouldn't want to turn away from Torah mitzvahs. But a ger tzedek, what's really important to understand, this is one of the reasons why we do such good due diligence. The Beis Din does before a ger is accepted. The most horrible thing would be to say, yeah, come on in, welcome, zechusula, it's a great merit for you. 6 months later, 6 years later, the fellow walks away totally dispirited and totally defeated. This is a waste of time. I wish I'd never become a ger tzedek. I'm going back to become a non-Jew. We have an achrayus, we have a responsibility. If you draw somebody into the religion, albeit on their own volition, it's on our heads as well if it doesn't work. And that's why I believe, and we'll see in the following sources, there is such a strong mitzvah of v'ahavtem esager, loving the proselyte once he or she has completed the process. Now, in source number 11, a Gemara I alluded to before in Bava Metzia Daf Nun Tes, we just touched on Daf Nun Tes based Tanya Rabbi Loza Rabbi Loza, the godly, used to say, why does Torah warn in 36 places? 46 places the Torah warns us about a proselyte. Because in some way we view the nature of the ger as suspect. Now, again, please don't get offended, any potential ger or gerim on the call. This is not intended and is not in any way a poor reflection on you. Exactly the opposite. Surah means, first of all, we, when things go bad, have got an extended family and community network to fall back on. We feel a bit miserable, we can phone up the rabbi and have a moan at him. We can phone up the shul office and have a rant at them. We can phone up our neighbor. We can speak to whatever, all sorts of people who we can speak to if we want to be able to get chizuk, encouragement. The non-Jew proselyte doesn't have that supportive network. That's one explanation in Surah Ra. Rashi also explained in Kiddushin with regard to an unmarried teacher of young children that this is considered to be a risky scenario, high risk scenario. Why? Because we only understood the wisdom of that Rashi in the Torah in the modern day and age, where we talk about vulnerable young adults and the risks that predatory individuals can pose towards these people. That's what the Gemara is warning us. Surah, there is a risk that as far as even the convert is concerned, if you don't give them that support and that care and that attention, who knows where it will end up. And therefore continues to go, what's the meaning of the pasuk? Don't oppress the ger. Don't pressurize him or her in any way. For you as sojourners in the land of Egypt, be sensitive, be aware. We know what it's like to feel the odd person out, to feel the stranger, to be the other. That's what people say. If one has in one's family history, background, someone who was a black sheep and was unfortunately hanged in the days when there was capital punishment, or in the area of capital punishment, don't say to your fellow, don't say to your friend, oh, hang up that fish, string up that fish, because that in itself would show an irreverence, a flippancy as far as the sensitivity in your own background. And knowing that we share a certain common background with proselytes means we need ourselves to be sensitive to their feelings. Now, source number 12 is not directly relevant to Gerus, but it is relevant to all of us, Gerim and non-Gerim, about life. A very important lesson of life. Tana Rabban, the rabbis taught, 2.5 years, Beis Shammai Beis Hillel disputed the question as follows. One side said, it would have been better not to be created. Not that we get a choice in it, but theoretically, is it better to be created or not? Better not to have been created. The others said, better to have been created than not to have been created. Baruch Hashem, we're alive, we can do things, life is a gift. Nimnu v'gomru. When they finally concluded this matter and they rallied together to work out the total, they concluded it would have been better not to have been created. Rather gloomy, perhaps a slightly difficult, jarring perspective on life, jaundiced perspective on life. Better not to have been created. But now we have been created. A person should be particular, search one's deeds. And some say one should examine one's deeds. Meforshim explain that searching one's deed means checking how well you've done in the past, and the second lashon yemashmesh, which means to examine one's deeds, that is as far as planning the future is concerned. Tosfos there says an amazing thing. Tosfos said, what about that Gemara in Avodah Zarah, which says, we've got to be grateful to our forefathers, the fact that our forefathers, our forebears sinned with the Chet Egel and with the Chet HaMeraglim. If they hadn't sinned, we wouldn't have come into the world. Why? Because Mashiach would have come, would have been the end of the story, and that would have been the end of the story. So what's that Gemara imply? The underlying hypothesis, the underlying position is that it's good to be created. Thank God we're here, we're alive. Wonderful, great to be alive. So in that case, what does that Gemara mean in terms of the conclusion of Beis Shammai Beis Hillel, better not to be created? So it says, what that means is we would have come into the world, but it would have been as though we hadn't come into the world because we wouldn't have had any struggles. We wouldn't have had to work hard and strive for the redemption of the world, for the improvement of the world. We wouldn't have had all the day-to-day struggles which we do in living, and to be able to be moral, ethical, decent, elevated people in our lives. Inami Tosfos gives a second answer as to why the Gemara in Avodah Zarah implies that it's good to be born, even though the Gemara in everyone seems to conclude it's not good. Here we're talking about stam b'nei Adam, regular people who just drift through life and don't make the most of its opportunities and don't make a conscious effort to improve, to grow, to develop. So regular people, for them, better not to come in this world. Avol tzaddik, but a righteous person, Ashrov Ashrei Doreh. Happy is he, and happy is he or her generation. And I brought that Gemara down because I think it's relevant to Gerim and to us as Bnei Yisrael. Every single Jew has to live with this motif in life. If you're already created, if you're part of Am Yisrael, if you've converted, if you're going to convert, if you are born Jewish, make sure you make the most of the opportunity. Max out on it, as they say nowadays. Make sure that you do the website. As Tosa says there, that the Gemara, which says we need to be grateful that we've been created, even though the Gemara in Avery concludes better not to be created. The reason is because if you live a life of rich purpose, of righteousness, of goodness, of elevated moral and spiritual purpose, then for sure it's a good thing to have been created. So, the final two sources, source number 13, page 5, says Rav Nachman, Gemara Yevomas Chaf Beis Amadav 22a, Geirim Hel v'Osel Yodin Nemu B'Milsa. Says Rav Nachman, having a discussion in the base of Medrash, said Geirim, proselytes, since we happen to have, they've been brought to our attention in this discussion in the base of Medrash, let's say something about them. Achim Mina Eim Lo Ya'idu, very interesting question. A Ger Tzedek, what is his or her relationship to the family they had before conversion? Again, it's beyond the scope of this year to go into this question in detail, but it's a very interesting question. What relationships do you keep? And what is the legal status of the relationship? Can a Ger Tzedek marry his sister? So we have a principle that Eidos, for example, I'll come back to that question in a minute, the Eidos testimony can only be borne by people who are not related. So it says the following: if you've got brothers who are brothers from the mother at the time when they were non-Jews, they shouldn't give testimony together because, as Rashi explains there, it's considered to be that the kurva sa'im, the relationship that comes from the mother who carried them, is vadai, is definite, and therefore it's not such a good thing, even though technically it's possible. Therefore, if they give you testimony, their testimony is acceptable. If they're only from the father, they can give testimony immediately because in the first instance. Ameba says that even Achim Noaim can give testimony in the first instance. What's the difference from Aroyos? We do not allow a proselyte to marry his sister. Apart from that, it would be illegal in civil law, but even in Jewish law, even though technically it would be okay, we can't do it because Erva Lakol Masura. Erva, relationships, people decide who to marry of their own volition. And there is a risk if you start allowing proselytes who are brother and sister to get married, then you'll allow, or people will start thinking, well, I can marry my sister even though we were born Jewish. Aegis the based in Masura. Aegis is something owned by based, and they won't come to make that mistake. But what's the underlying principle? Why is it that it's possible for a proselyte to marry his sister theoretically, and they can give testimony together? A ger, there's a beautiful idea. Proselyte, when he or she goes through conversion, it's like a rebirth. They're born again. It's a new beginning. They're like a new person, not the same person they were before. And this speaks of vulnerability and speaks of opportunity as well, and how much we have to welcome and support. And that's what comes out as source number 14 here as well. Mitzvahs of the chinuch, the mitzvah lev sager in the poskin Devarim Yud v'ahavtim es sager, you shall love the stranger. One of the 36 or 46 places in the Torah that was pointed out to us previously that gerim has no obligation to show love to gerim. Mishor shem mitzvah says sefer chinuch. One of the underlying reasons for this mitzvah is ki Hashem bocha b'Yisrael yos le'olam kodesh. The Almighty chose the Jewish people to be a holy nation for Him. For we want to find favor for them. Therefore, He guides and instructs them to behave in a gracious and merciful way. How much pleasantness is there? How much decency, how much desirability is there to try and help a person who's left behind all that was familiar, his people, his entire family, his parents' home, and he or she has chosen to come and shelter under the protective wings of another nation, through his love of it, and through his own free will and choice, He's chosen the truth and he's rejected falsehood. Such a person, such a proselyte who's been through the process and has done so with flying colors to full extent, such a person, noelo v'yoelo, how beautiful and wonderful it is. And that's why, even though we are ambivalent, that's the complementary dichotomy of conversion al pi halacha. We are very ambivalent at the beginning of the journey. We're even suspicious. We're very careful about the way that we develop things. Ultimately, we come to a situation where a ger has proven his or her mettle, that we salute them, we admire them, we support them, we love them, they're part of our extended family, and we're here for them to maximum extent to purpose. I hope that's taken you through the process of this complementary dichotomy of conversion. It's complementary. The paths all come together and conclude at V'ahavtem es hager, but there is the dichotomy in terms of the way in which initially we engage with that ger tzedek, but through doing so, please God, we only enhance the integrity of Am Yisrael. We make sure indeed that those gerim, righteous proselytes who join our ranks, should be a credit to us, a credit to themselves, a credit to the Almighty, and should help us all on our journey to the Geula Shlema, to the complete and final redemption, to the healing, Roifei Cholboso Mafli La'asos, the bringing of healing and doing wondrously to all human beings who need healing so much at this time. And shkoyach to all of you for joining us today, and to Matmid and Rabbi Daniel Fine, Tashema, which is, we're still looking to the formats going forward, but we have these Matmid programs which join together, also complementary, not dichotomy, but complementary, harmonious interaction. So next week will be Adam Vachnoven in conversation with Rabbi Portnoy about the modern day Geras Pros. I know Adam has to just leave us now, but nice to have seen you all, and shkoyach for joining us, and everyone should be well, stay safe, and Simchas Besuras Tovos, only good and positive and happy news. Thank you all so much.
Good. Thank you very, very much.
Baruchim to you. Pleasure. If anyone wants to unmute and ask a question, I've got literally 2 or 3 minutes, and then I have to move on to my next Zoom appointment. All okay?
We're unmuted.
Anyone unmuted wants to ask a question, you can raise your hand in the chat. Okay. I'm going to leave. Thank you all so much. Have a good day.
Thank you.